this Uranus-Pluto square. So basically, we could start to see everything in our lives in the next 4 to 5 years here as really representing, in some sense, of an extension of this square that's in the sky. So Uranus will square Pluto exactly 7 times in a period of 3 years, which is really unprecedented. You know, because the planets will go forward and backward. It's called retrograde. And so every time that this happens, it's like a peak moment. So if we had like a graph, you'd have this kind of like, okay, the intensification of energy here, a little bit of a break, intense, but the energy will, like if we think of the 60s, will be really amped consistently throughout this time. And so, you know, in previous Uranus-Pluto cycles, they've maybe contacted over 3 or 4 years, you know, 2 times, 3 times. This time it's like 7 times. So what this means is like more dynamism, a little bit more chaos happening, more shift, you know, consistently occurring, right? And so less important, I think, are the exact dates of the exactness, but the sense of what is actually unfolding here. So again, we have this electric, revolutionary spirit of Uranus coming in to meet Pluto. Now, Pluto is the lord of transformation, death and rebirth. He was the god of the underworld, Hades. Right? So with Pluto, you know, all of our ego resistances come up, you know, and there's a real need to surrender, because what has to happen with Pluto is necessary for evolution. This is very important. It's that idea of shedding the skin so that the new self can be born. Well, what's happening with Pluto is that Pluto is in the sign of Capricorn. So Capricorn as an archetype rules, like all those things we talked about with Saturn, all of the structures of the world, including banking, governments, the institutions, the structures we've taken for granted, you know. So Pluto is coming in to say, look, I'm going to reveal all of the detritus, the darkness, the shadow, which is what Pluto does, of this archetype Capricorn in the world. So that's why we see all of the failure of all of the structures that we've been depending on. And it's going to continue throughout the whole decade. Pluto doesn't move out of Capricorn until, I think, 2024. Okay.
Dedication. It's all that real heavy.
It's the earth element, and it's moving towards, it's a cardinal sign, so it's moving towards achievement. It has goals. You know, in the highest, it's the wise elder, right? So what's seeking to be born right now out of this death of Capricorn is all of the shadow of it. So it's been, you know, let's get rid of those structures that aren't supportive of us, that aren't in their integrity, Capricorn word, that aren't really truthful, so that we can build the structures that are going to be sustainable, another Capricorn word, because we live in an economic system that isn't sustainable. It's not real, right? Capricorn is a very real world and wants what is, so working with, you know, things like all natural materials, working with renewable energies, right? This is ultimately what the Capricorn wants to do, what works. And if it's not working and Pluto's there, it's going to die. Integrity, yeah, exactly. And that's why that's why you're seeing now. And so this brings in the Uranus, right? The people, those who want freedom, those who want to break free of those false structures of power, Pluto and Capricorn, they're going to rebel. They're going to fight. And that fervor is going, that kind of like an electric pulse, right, is moving through the people to fight against those structures that aren't supportive, that aren't for real, that are, you know, hierarchical. Because actually Capricorn in its shadow is a very hierarchical sign. you have to earn this degree, and then you move up to this level, and it's like business, right? Or like being a CEO, or being in the army, and you're the sergeant, and the lieutenant, and then the general. It's very Capricorn. But actually, the highest expression is not really about hierarchy. It's about respect and those who have done the work. So in say, the indigenous traditions, Capricorn would be the sense of you've passed certain initiations, right? So then you move to certain levels of honor in the culture, right? And that's why we talk about Capricorn ultimately being the wise elder that everyone turns to, or the shaman chief, right? Well, the people in power haven't earned their power. They haven't earned it, right? And that's what Capricorn is about, earning. That's where the integrity comes from. So you have now, like in the Arab world, everything in Egypt and Libya, right, and Tunisia and everywhere else, you have this electric awakening happening amongst the peoples who don't want to be suppressed anymore, right? And the same thing is actually happening here. It's just like much easier to candy coat it because our lives are, you know, we have more, we have more. It's just, yeah, more complexity. We have an abundance of material things here. We can camouflage it, right? But you do see that, like, I mean, whatever you can take for what it's worth, like approval ratings for things like Congress and the government in general being like at like peak lows, you know. So this is this energy of Uranus-Pluto. It is very political, but it's also very cultural. I want to name a couple things that we expect with this, that we've seen in other cycles. Let me tell you some other cycles when this occurred. Uranus and Pluto came together in conjunction, like I said, in the 60s. And then before that, they were squaring like they are now, 90 degrees. They were squaring in the late 20s and 30s. Called the Great Depression, right? The rise of dictatorships, right, around the world. People during Uranus-Pluto are seeking new kinds of power structures, new kinds of governments, new kinds of ways of relating with each other. In that time period, the 20s and 30s, there was all these birthings of these movements, socialism, communism, fascism, all of these different, like, people reaching for different ways of, interacting and governing each other, right? So I'll get a little bit more into 20s and 30s. But then if we cycle back a little bit more, the turn of the century was another connection with Uranus-Pluto, and we could keep going back. But there was the 1840s is a very important cycle to look at, the late 1840s and early 50s. This is when the annexation of California and Texas took place, and the Mexican-American War, and there was revolutions all over Europe in 1848. We don't really study that here. We don't even study our own history here very well. But like in Europe, it was massive. Through every major city, there was this revolutionary pulse. And if we go back further, we can find that the revolutionary theme is consistent in every Uranus-Pluto contact. It was the revolution in America and in France. The French and American revolutions were dominated by the Uranus-Pluto energy at that time. Uranus was actually discovered at that time too, which is very powerful, because the discovery of a planet, in our perception, opens up the dimensions of what it means to us on an archetypal level. So here's Uranus discovered, and all of these revolutionary people's movements are happening all over the planet. That's what it really represents. And I'll tell you more about Neptune and when it was discovered and how that was mirrored at that time, because we're going into a very powerful cycle with Neptune as well. You have a question? Okay. So you have this sense of rebellion, revolution, radical shift through culture. There's often this destructive upheaval that takes place. I mean, I heard some really very challenging stories this week from Libya, if anyone else did, and like, we were talking about real bloody, violent stuff going on that is hard to take. But if you study history and you look at the French Revolution, I mean, there's decapitations happening left and right. That's this energy, Pluto, death, intensity, violence, that like is sort of necessary for this evolution to take place, right? This is not a peaceful time. This is not a serene type of energy, and that's what we're saying in the next few years. There's this consistent upheaval taking place. We can look at well, I'll give you a couple more key words and then move on just a little bit. Well, no, it doesn't. I mean, well, that's the potential with utilizing other tools from these archetypes. Like Uranus is the planet of technology and innovation. So here you had in these revolutions, Twitter and Facebook being fundamental, and we know for any of the social revolutions happening in the coming years, this kind of media is going to be fundamental in that unfolding, and that's a way. And here's a very good example. I wrote about this back in January. At the same time as Egypt was unfolding, we had this really amazing flash mob event happen in Austin, Texas. And a few of these have happened now in different places, but where a bunch of yogis and meditators went to the Capitol, and they like positioned themselves all over the Capitol building in Austin, and then they like gathered in a circle in the center of the Capitol, where the big star is on the ground, and they meditated and chanted Om for an hour straight. And this is where we're trying to go with these revolutions, and this gets into what else is unfolding in this next decade, which is Neptune and Pisces. Neptune, the sign of the mystic and the dreamer, the artist, the yogi, the healer. Pisces, this kind of energy of oneness, consciousness. So the potential there is for incredible spiritual types of revolutions to take place that have nothing to do with violence.